In this last session, we're going to be talking about your project presentation, what we mean by this, what you need to include in it, and some good guidelines for good presentations. This section obviously comes a little bit later than the rest of the sessions, as you don't really need to be thinking about this until after the Christmas break and when most of your project is already completed. So the project presentation, everyone who completes an EPQ is required to give a project presentation to their mentor group. So this is just to your mentor and the people within that group. But without a presentation, you haven't completed your EPQ. It will be an incomplete project. Unless there are major extenuating circumstances, everyone will be giving a presentation. And essentially it is a verbal explanation of your project and your process to create it. It's not you teaching the class or the group about your topic, it's about you explaining your project and your process. Okay, and it's a chance for the others to question you about your project, what skills you have learned and developed, perhaps any areas that they're interested in that they would like to know a bit more information about that you weren't able to include in your presentation. The presentation itself is between 5 and 6 minutes in length, and then usually there's about 3 or 4 minutes of questioning afterwards. The questions are required. Your mentor will ask you questions about your project, and the people in your class and group will also have to ask you questions about your project. You will be assessed on your ability to answer questions, so if nobody asks any questions, we can't give you any marks for that section of the presentation. But the big thing to remember about this project presentation is it's not about the topic that you have chosen for your project, it's about your project. You are presenting your project. So what should be covered in this presentation? Well, first of all, you do need visual aids. So you can't just stand there and talk. You do need to have some visual aids. Again, it's part of the marking criteria, so you do need to use them. Now, most popular is obviously PowerPoint for the presentation, but you could use a program such as eMaze or Prezi. You could even record your presentation prior to the lesson to show instead of actually giving the presentation live. You will still need to be present to answer questions afterwards, but there is the option to pre-record your presentation should you wish. If you do pre-record the presentation, it does need to be included in your folder as a disk rather than a USB. And with any form of presentation, please make sure that it's accessible in school, on the school system. Have it saved on OneDrive so it's easily accessible during the lesson, so we're not having to log in and log out and all of that malarkey. Particularly if you're using eMaze, Prezi or something similar to that, make sure it works on the school system, because if it doesn't and you can't use it in your presentation, you will not get marks for the visual aids. The presentation itself then needs to include an explanation of what you did and why. Why did you choose this topic? What was interesting about it? Why did you choose your particular outcome, dissertation or artifact? You need to talk about what you found out whilst completing the project, both knowledge and skills wise. So what was your learning during the project while completing the project? Skills and techniques you developed, as I've said before. The skills area is the area that people forget about, and that's where they then prevent themselves getting into band 4 of marks, because they don't talk about their skill acquisition. And then it's a little bit reflective. If you were to do the project again, what would you do differently? And if you were to continue with the project, where would you take it? So essentially we're looking at here maybe 5, maybe 6 slides, one slide for each bullet point that you can see on the screen there. But your presentation does need to be good. It's not just a case of standing up there and just blathering on. You do need to think about your presentation skills. So there are some common mistakes that people make when they're giving presentations, and particularly with their visual aids. So first of all, with the visual aids, they tend to write everything they're going to say on the slide. So every word, or loads of information on the slide. If you're going to if you're going to say it, don't write it. Okay. They also tend to use lots of animation and transitions because it's snazzy and it looks funky and all the rest of it. It's distracting. Use animation if it's necessary. Use a transition if it's necessary. If it's not, don't use it. Keep it simple, keep it clean. They also tend to use clashing colour schemes on their presentations. Keep it as neutral. Perhaps not necessarily white on black, because that can be hard sometimes for people to read, but a muted colour scheme. Don't go red and yellow or anything like that, because also what you see on your computer screen is not necessarily what you're going to see through the projector. They have different specs on that. Lots of different fonts or decorative fonts, which is really hard to read. Keep your fonts academic, keep them clean, keep them clear. Century, Gothic, Tahoma, Calibri, Arial, these are the sort of fonts that are going to be clear and easy to read on the screen. Something frilly and fancy makes it difficult. All those bullet journaling fonts and things like that don't do well in a visual presentation. If you're going to use graphics or graphs or pictures or anything like that, make sure people can see them. You don't want them too small. Remember, the size of your slide is not, that you see on the screen, is not what is going to be projected. Your text should at no point be below, I'd say about 18 font. Okay, you want to make it clear so that people can read it. When they're actually giving the presentation, some of the things you need to avoid doing are things like slouching with your hands in your pockets. You want to come across as confident and that you know your stuff, you own the room. Things like clicking pens or some form of fidgeting or fidget tool will distract from what you're saying. Filler in words like, you know, things like that. Now, it's not saying don't use them at all. We're human. Our brains don't necessarily function at the same speed that our mouths do or anything like that. And you'll know from my videos, I use fillers as well, but we don't want it every second word is an you know, like, yeah, It distracts. It doesn't give the confidence that you, or suggest confidence in what you are saying, or you know what you're talking about. You shouldn't have notes to read from. Yes, have flashcards as prompts, but no scripts. You are talking to your audience. You are not reading to them. And mumbling, giggling, things like that. Be clear, be confident. You are in control, you are in charge. You want to put that sort of persona across, even if inside you are quaking, quivering wreck, stomach in knots, feeling sick and wanting to curl up in a corner and cry. Don't show it. It's acting, essentially. And as long as it doesn't come across in your presentation, you'll get good marks for the confident delivery. If you come across as very nervous, that will also come across in the marking of your presentation. So what hints and tips can I give you? Well, first of all, talk to your audience. Okay, they're there to listen to you. They don't want to read a screen. They can do that at home. They didn't need to come in for that. So talk to your audience. Eye contact. If you're not comfortable with eye contact, look at someone's forehead. Pick a point at the back of the room just above people's heads and look at that, rather than looking at your feet, looking at your notes, looking anywhere but at your audience. Know what you want to say and practice it. Don't know why that's gone in the wrong order, but never mind. You write a script by all means and practice that script, but know it by the time you give your presentation. Try and keep it natural so it's not monotonous or sound like you're just reading, but but know what you want to say. Practice your presentation before you give it. If you're going to say it, don't write it. As I've said before, your screen, your PowerPoint should be a complement to what you're saying. It's not your script. It's not your, it can act as a prompt, but it should have very little written on it, really. So we have more pictures than words. Think of it as your background rather than your script. And minimize the number of slides. The suggestion is 5 or 6 slides maximum. Just because you're trying to minimize the amount you're writing on a slide doesn't mean you should have a presentation of 200 slides. So we're looking at 5 or 6 slides, 7 maybe, but you want to keep it minimal. Okay, remember your PowerPoint is your background. It is not your what you're saying. And finally, be prepared for questions. We have to ask you questions as part of the presentation. It's what you're going to get marked on. So be prepared to answer questions. Leave little kind of hooks in your presentation where you can almost subconsciously, or consciously on your part, but subconsciously in your audience, get them to ask questions. So you don't have to explain everything completely fully. Just leave something a little bit dangling. And then kind of like, so what about, you said this, but what does that mean? And things like that. So you're leading your audience to the questions that you want them to ask you. Okay. How will the presentation be marked? So you will be assessed by your mentor as well as the people in your mentor group. They will have forms that they have to fill in regarding your presentation, which will be given to you at the end of your presentation. Okay, it's because they need to go into your folder. So you need this, you'll do this for other people in your group, they will do it for you. So what will they be looking for? They're going to be looking at your presentation skills. Were you keeping good eye contact, or at least pretending to keep eye contact by looking above people's heads or looking at foreheads or things like that, however you're going to do it. Are you clear in what you're saying? Can they hear you? Can they understand you? Do you have good tone and volume? So when we're talking about tone, we're talking about not being monotonous and talking in a single tone throughout the entire presentation, because that is really boring and it will send everybody to sleep. But at the same time, you're not kind of jumping all over the place like a hyperactive, energized bunny. Are you loud enough that you can be heard but not shouting? When you're talking, are you talking at a speed that seems relatively natural rather than speeding through it as quickly as possible because you're really, really nervous and you don't really want to do it and then people can't understand you, or talking so slowly that it sounds like you're a sloth and you don't really know what you're doing, so you need to really think about it. So those sort of skills are what we're going to be looking for. We want to see you confident, we want to see eye contact or semblance of it, clarity, understandable, good tone, good volume, good speed. In terms of content, have you summarized your project, summarized your experience of doing the project? Is what you're talking about appropriate for a non-specialist to understand? So you may have very good technical knowledge of what you're doing, but is somebody who's not a specialist in your area able to understand it? And is your use of visual aids complementing your presentation or not distracting it, not inappropriate in any way? Are you using those visual aids to support your presentation? And then your discussion, post-presentation discussion, can you answer questions with confidence, and can you actually answer them at all? Now, that's not to say you might get a question that you're not able to answer, and that's fine. Rather than bluff it or blag it, just say, actually, I don't know, but I would like to explore that further. Should I take my project further? Admit that there may be things that you don't necessarily know. Blagging it can usually backfire on you, but can you answer those questions? Are you able to do so confidently? that sort of thing. So that these will all be assessed on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being unsatisfactory, 5 being outstanding. And we'll also have to write comments about why we've given the numerical grade that we have. Now, what you'll also have to do is a self-assessment of your presentation, covering the same areas that we cover in the peer and mentor assessment. So you need to kind of talk about your presentation skills, the content, your ability to answer questions, but also you then need to go on and talk about what went well, what you need to improve on. If you were to do it again, how would you do it differently? Okay. But the presentation is an integral part of your project, and your visual aids need to be printed off and put into your folder. Your evaluations and assessments need to be put into your folder as well. They will form part of the project. Now, as an examiner, as somebody who, or not an examiner, as a marker of the EPQ, your presentation gives me quite a good understanding or a good indication of what I'm going to see when you hand your folder in. So a good presentation can put me in a good frame of mind when it comes to marking your project. Okay, so it's all part of the process. And just remember that the presentation, yes, it is compulsory, but it's nothing to worry about. It's nothing to be scared of. There will be less than 10 people in the room, I imagine. Okay, and if you're really that worried about doing it live, there is always the option to pre-record it and just play the video.